In exactly 3 minutes, you will discover why your body would be found unrecognizable under the rock. Not in a war, not in an accident, but in 5 minutes of absolute horror that killed 100,000 people while they prayed. November 1st, 1755, All Saints' Day, Lisbon. 9:40 a.m. The church is packed, the candles lit, the families gathered, and then the ground simply ceased to exist. But before understanding how an entire city was erased in minutes, you need to know a terrifying truth. If you had been there with all your modern knowledge, with all your intelligence, you would have died not by bad luck, not by fate, but because absolutely everything in Lisbon that day was a death trap. And worst of all, the survivors discovered that the earthquake was just the first of 3 apocalypses that would occur in the next 6 hours. So, do you want to understand why you would die in Lisbon? Let me shatter your illusions about 1755. Forget period films, forget historical novels. Lisbon wasn't a city. It was a vertical slaughterhouse, waiting for the right moment to collapse. 250,000 people crammed into a stone maze, where the widest streets were 3 meters wide. 3 meters wide. Your corridors are wider. Imagine waking up in a windowless room. The floor is packed earth, mixed with decades of human urine which has run down from the floor above. Yes, because your second-floor neighbor empties his chamber pot out the window every morning at 6 a.m. It's your alarm clock, the smell of fresh feces mixed with fish rotting for 3 days in the November heat. You share this 4-square-meter cubicle with 7 other people. Your children sleep on the same straw mattress where you conceived the next. Fleas the size of grains of rice leap from the straw onto your skin. Each bite transmits typhus, bubonic plague, or any of the 37 deadly diseases circulating in Lisbon. But you're modern, you know about hygiene. So you decide to wash your hands, where the water comes from public wells contaminated with sewage. 80% of children die before the age of 5 drinking this water. The 20% who survive develop immunity. You don't have that immunity. Your first week in Lisbon, you're dead from dysentery. Let's say by some miracle you survive, you need to work. But you don't speak archaic Portuguese. You don't know the 500 social rules that determine who you can talk to, how you should bow, what words you can use. You look a nobleman in the eye for 2 seconds, lashings in a public square. You use your left hand to greet, a sign of the devil. The Inquisition. The Inquisition is still active, still torturing, still burning. Do you know how many were executed in Lisbon the year of the earthquake? 57. For crimes like possessing books in Hebrew, having sex on a holy day, questioning why the priest has 3 lovers. You're a woman. You can't go out without a veil. You can't speak without your husband's permission. You can't choose who to marry. Your father sells you at 12 to a 50-year-old merchant. You're a man, you have to enlist in the seas. 70% don't return. They die of scurvy, their teeth falling out and bleeding from their paws. The houses were death traps by design. 6, 7 stories built without engineering. Stones stacked with clay, without proper foundations, without structural calculations. The illiterate builders learned from their father, who learned from their grandfather. The same technique for 300 years. Each house a 40-ton domino waiting to fall. And inside these traps, candles lit 24 hours a day, because there are no windows on the lower floors, open fireplaces spitting sparks onto cheap fabric curtains, whale oil boiling for light, dry straw covering the floor. You are literally living inside an incendiary bomb. And living in this incendiary bomb of stone and straw, you still had to survive the true terror of Lisbon. The other 250,000 inhabitants. November 1st, All Saints' Day, a mandatory religious holiday. Mandatory means that if you didn't go to Mass, your neighbors would report you to the Inquisition. So at 9 a.m., the entire city was crammed into churches built for 1/3 of that capacity. The Basilica of São Vicente de Fora, the official capacity. 1,000 people that morning, 4,000 crammed inside, women fainting from the heat and tightness, children being trampled, old people dying standing up, and no one noticing because there was no room to fall. But here's what made it all a perfect death trap. Lisbon's churches were the most dangerous buildings in the city. 40-meter towers without proper buttresses, 15-ton vaulted ceilings supported by non-structural decorative columns, 1,000 candles lit, incense burning, fabrics hanging everywhere, and the doors. A 2-meter-wide main entrance for 4,000 people. When the first tremor struck at 9:40, it took exactly 12 seconds for the first crushing death at the door. Not from the earthquake, but from the panic. you would survive. Let's do the math. You're in the middle of the church. 2,000 people between you and the exit. Each person takes 3 seconds to pass through the door under normal circumstances. In a panic, no one gets through. Everyone dies crushed. But let's say you didn't go to church. Congratulations. You're a heretic and will be burned alive by the Inquisition. If you survive the earthquake, of course, because being on the street wasn't any better. Lisbon's buildings were built using a technique called the Pombaline cage. Sounds sturdy, doesn't it? It was a trap that turned the entire house into a stone guillotine. The upper floors projected over the street. Each one jutted out half a meter beyond the lower. A 3-meter street on the ground floor had a 1.5-meter top. When the tremor struck, these projections collapsed first. 30 tons of stone falling from a 15-meter height. You have 0.8 seconds to react. It's not even enough to look up. What if you survived the first few seconds? The dust, millions of tons of lime, plaster and mortar, sprayed into the air. In 90 seconds, Lisbon disappeared in a cloud so dense people couldn't see their own hands. Do you breathe that? Your lungs fill with lime paste. Death by asphyxiation in 4 minutes. But let's assume the impossible. You survived the collapse, the crushing, the asphyxiation. You are one of the lucky ones who reached Terreiro do Passo, the main square by the river. Open space with no buildings to fall. 15,000 people had the same idea, and that's exactly why they all died. 15,000 people running to Terreiro do Passo, thinking the open space would save them. 15,000 people who had never heard the word tsunami. 9:40. The first tremor lasts an eternal 90 seconds. The ground ripples like water. 3-meter cracks open and close, swallowing people whole. The sound is indescribable. It's not just the roar of the earth. It's 40,000 buildings collapsing simultaneously, mixed with the screams of 100,000 people. 9:45. 5 minutes of deceptive calm. Survivors begin to dig desperately. Mothers searching for babies, husbands digging with their bare hands. And then the second tremor, more violent, longer, a full 2 minutes. What was left of the first now turns to dust. The Tejo Opera House, inaugurated months earlier, Lisbon's handmaid. 400 people watching the morning rehearsal. The 12-ton solid gold ceiling collapses entirely. A 12-ton gold plate falling 20 meters. Everyone dies instantly. Their bodies were never found. The gold melted in the subsequent fire, sealed it forever. 9:50. The third tremor, the coup de grace. The Belém Tower, which had withstood 500 years, cracks in half. The royal palace collapses onto the surrounding poorhouses. There is no longer a distinction between rich and poor. Death has leveled everyone, but the survivors in the Terreiro do Passo notice something strange. The Tagus River, which was 50 meters away, has disappeared. The exposed riverbed has disappeared. Ships stranded in the mud, fish thrashing. Treasures from ancient shipwrecks glistening in the sun. Hundreds rush to loot. Gold, silver, coins of fortune exposed. Men fighting over chests, women stuffing their skirts with coins, children scavenging what they can. No one realizes the sea hasn't disappeared. It's returning at 70 km/h in the form of a 15-meter wall of water. 10:10, 30 minutes after the first tremor. The tsunami hits Lisbon. But it's not one wave, it's 3. The first sweeps through Terreiro do Passo. 15,000 people disappearing in 4 seconds. Simply erased. The second wave, 5 minutes later, penetrates 3 kilometers inland. The third, the largest, reaches neighborhoods that had never seen the river. The Carmo convent, 300 nuns praying for the earthquake's victims. Water enters through the second-story windows. They climb to the third. The water rises. On the 4th floor, the water continues to rise. There's nowhere left to go. 300 nuns drown while praying, but the tsunami doesn't just kill by drowning. It turns the city into a giant blender. Pieces of buildings, trees, carriages, bodies, all spinning at deadly speeds. People don't drown. They are crushed, torn apart. A survivor described, bodies without heads, heads without bodies, arms still clinging to babies that no longer existed. While the crushed bodies still floated in the waters that invaded Lisbon, while the survivors clung to debris trying not to drown, the third apocalypse had already begun. Silent, invisible, but more deadly than the earthquake and tsunami combined. At 10:20, the water begins to recede. It drags thousands of bodies with it, but leaves behind something worse. All those lit candles in the churches, all those domestic fireplaces, all those bakery ovens now fallen on curtains, on broken furniture, on pools of spilled whale oil. Lisbon begins to burn. It's not a fire. It's 10,000 simultaneous fires, and the tsunami wind, still blowing off the sea, turns each spark into a torch. Within 30 minutes, entire neighborhoods are in flames. The temperature in the city center reaches 1,000 degrees C. 1,000. Gold melts at 960. People don't burn, they vaporize. The Royal Hospital of All Saints. 800 patients trapped in their beds. The earthquake didn't kill them. The tsunami didn't reach the 3rd floor, but the fire did. 800 people burned alive, tied to their own beds. The screams lasted 40 minutes. Then only the sound of the fire. But the true horror was those trapped under the rubble. Thousands still alive, buried under tons of stone. They could hear the fire approaching, feel the heat increasing. Some had only their legs trapped. They cut their own legs with pieces of glass trying to escape. It didn't work. The fire got there first. The Royal Library. 70,000 books. Unique maps of navigation. Records of entire civilizations. 500 years of knowledge. Everything turned to ash in 6 hours. But it wasn't just books burning. The monks tried to save the manuscripts, forming human chains, passing books from hand to hand. When the roof collapsed in flames, 43 monks chose to burn to death rather than abandon their books. They were found charred, still clutching manuscripts to their chests. The fire lasted 5 days. 50 days, why? Because Lisbon was a maze of dead ends. The firefighters died in the earthquake. The water wells were destroyed. The river was blocked by mountains of rubble. There was no way to put it out. Just wait for it all to burn, and the fire was unforgiving. The Palace of the Inquisition burned, along with all the records of torture. Ironically, it also burned with 200 prisoners still alive in the basement cells. They scratched the stone walls until their fingers turned to stumps of bone. The marks still remain. The mint caught fire on the 3rd day. 80 tons of gold and silver melted. The liquid metal ran through the streets like golden rivers. Desperate people tried to catch it with their hands. They lost their hands. The molten metal stuck to their skin and continued to burn until it reached the bone. And while the molten gold, still smoldering in the cobblestone streets, as the fire consumed the last screams of those trapped under the rubble, the survivors discovered that the physical hell was only the beginning. Now the psychological hell began. November 6, 5 days after the earthquake, 30,000 survivors wandered the ruins without water, food or shelter, but with a question no one dared ask aloud. Why did God do this on All Saints' Day? With the churches packed with worshippers, Father Malagrida had the answer. The Italian Jesuit began preaching in the still smoldering ruins. God is furious with Lisbon. The city has become a Sodom. Earthquakes are divine warnings. Repent or worse will come. Desperate crowds began to follow him. Processions of flagellants marched over the bodies. Men whipped themselves to the bare bones. Women ripped their faces open with their nails. Children forced to walk barefoot over broken glass. The blood of the penitents mixed with the blood of the dead. But there was another group, those who saw brothels standing and churches destroyed. They saw criminals survive and saints die. They saw babies crushed and murderers unharmed. And they began to question, what kind of God is this? The Inquisition acted quickly. To question was heresy. To doubt was a mortal sin. Then the executions began. Yes, executions, with 70,000 dead still unburied, with orphan children eating rotten horse meat to survive. The church decided that the important thing was to burn heretics. January 21st, 1756, less than 3 months after the earthquake, high in faith in Rocio, 6 people were burned alive. The crime? They said the earthquake had natural causes, not divine. Among them Gabriel Malagrida, the same priest. The Inquisition decided he had gone too far. Blaming God was heresy too, but the collective mental breakdown had even more grotesque faces. Groups began to hunting for scapegoats. The Moors, who still lived in Lisbon, were accused of witchcraft. Dozens of converted Jews were lynched, tortured until they confessed to demonic pacts they never made. Foreigners were beaten for speaking different languages. A French woman, Marie de la Croix, survived the earthquake and tsunami. She was raped by 12 men who claimed to be purifying Lisbon of foreign influence. She survived. She was accused of witchcraft for surviving and burned alive. She was 16 years old. Orphaned children suffered the most. Without family, without protection, they became property of anyone. 8-year-old girls were prostituted for bread. Boys enslaved to dig up bodies. Those who resisted were branded with a hot iron like animals. The F for fugitive was stamped on their foreheads forever. And while branded children dug mass graves, while religious madness consumed the last vestiges of humanity, you need to understand a terrifying truth. All this will happen again. And when if it happens, you'll die just like them. 2023 Turkey and Syria. Magnitude 7.8 earthquake. 50,000 dead with satellites, seismic alerts, modern hospitals, rescue helicopters. 50,000 dead. Do you know why? Because earthquakes don't respect technology. Istanbul right now, 16 million people living on the North Anatolia Fault. Seismologists are categorical. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Predicted magnitude 7.5 or greater. Estimated death toll 400,000. 400,000, 4 times Lisbon, San Francisco. San Andreas Fault. Last major earthquake 1906, 120 years late. Los Angeles, Seattle, Tokyo, or time bombs. And you, where do you live? Because I can guarantee you're closer to a geological fault than you think. Brazil. Oh, you think you're safe in Brazil? Let me shatter your illusion. João Câmara, Rio Grande do Norte, 1986, magnitude 5.1. Houses destroyed, dead. In Minas Gerais, constant tremors. São Paulo sits on active geological faults. The last major earthquake in Brazil was in 1955. We're 70 years behind schedule, but let's do an exercise. You're now in your house, a magnitude 7 earthquake begins. You have 3 seconds to react. 3, 2, 1 died. Why? Because you don't know what to do. Run outside, killed by falling glass and tiles. Stay inside, killed by a collapse. Take cover under the table. Depends on the table. The brutal truth: 90% of earthquake deaths aren't caused by the tremor. They're caused by panic, bad decisions, and poorly constructed structures. Your building was built following anti-seismic codes. You don't even know what that means. Can your building's columns withstand lateral movement? You never asked. Japan, the world's most earthquake-prepared country. 2011 magnitude 9, 20,000 dead. If Japan, with all its technology, lost 20,000, what would happen in São Paulo? Rio de Janeiro, modern Lisbon, has an evacuation plan that would save at most 30% of the population. 70% would die today with all the technology. Will your cell phone help? The network goes down in 30 seconds. Hospitals destroyed or overwhelmed. Do you have water for 3 days? Canned food, a first aid kit? No, then you're already dead. It just hasn't happened yet. And you, with your useless cell phone and no water for 3 days, haven't seen the worst yet. Because the Lisbon earthquake didn't just kill 100,000 people. It killed God, at least the God Europe knew. November 11th, 1755, 10 days after the disaster, the news reaches Paris. Voltaire is drinking coffee when he reads the reports. He drops the cup. His hands tremble, but not from fear, but from anger. Intellectual anger. The question Lisbon silently screamed. He will shout to the world. If God is good and all-pervasive, why did he allow this? For 1,000 years, the church had an answer for everything. The Black Death, divine punishment, wars, God's will, famine, necessary trials. But Lisbon broke this logic. Babies crushed in cribs, drowned nuns praying, criminals surviving while saints died. Where was divine justice in this? Voltaire writes, poem on the disaster of Lisbon. Each verse is a slap in the face of the church. Is everything okay? Contemplate Lisbon and tell me if everything is okay. Come, philosophers who say, everything is necessary. Contemplate these horrible ruins, these wreckage, these rags, these wretched ashes. The church tries to censor it too late. The poem spreads like wildfire, translated into 12 languages in 3 months. Every intellectual in Europe reads it. And for the first time in 1,000 years, they dare to ask publicly, what if God doesn't care? What if there is no divine plan? What if we are alone? But the final blow comes from a man who was in Lisbon, Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, the future Marquis of Pombal, Prime Minister of Portugal. While priests were telling people to pray, he said something revolutionary. Bury the dead and care for the living. So God, no providence, no human action, Pombal banned religious processions. He had priests arrested for spreading panic. He executed looters, including nobles. He confiscated church property to rebuild the city. When the Pope protested, Pombal replied, God will not rebuild Lisbon. We will. And he rebuilt with engineers, not with prayers. With science, not with faith. Wide streets to prevent massive collapses. earthquake-resistant buildings, wide squares for refuge. Lisbon was reborn not by divine grace but by human labor. Europe watched in astonishment. If Lisbon could be rebuilt without God, what else could? If earthquakes had natural, not divine causes, what else was the church lying about? The Enlightenment exploded. Reason replaced faith, science replaced dogma. In 20 years, the American Revolution. In 30, the French Revolution, beheaded kings, closed churches. Los Angeles, San Andreas fault. Magnitude 8 predicted within the next 30 years. Probability 75%. Estimated death toll 100. But that's just the earthquake. The subsequent tsunami adds another 50,000. The fires are impossible to calculate. Istanbul. The jewel between two continents, 16 million people. 70% of the buildings wouldn't withstand magnitude 7. Hospitals built in high-risk areas. When the earthquake comes, the hospitals will collapse first. Where will you be treated when the hospitals are destroyed? Lisbon today. Yes, the same Lisbon. The population, 540,000. Extreme seismic risk. The fault that caused the 1755 earthquake is still active. Return period, 250 years. It's been 270 years. Lisbon is 20 years too late for the next one. And Brazil, which you think is safe. Acre, 1983, magnitude 5. 5. Cracked buildings, widespread panic. Brasilia, 2000, magnitude 3.7, felt throughout the city. São Paulo has had 112 earthquakes recorded in the last decade. 112. Did you feel any? No. Exactly. The problem? You're not prepared. China, 2008. Zoo, magnitude 8, 87,000 deaths. With modern technology, with alerts and preparedness, 87,000 deaths. Nepal, 2015, 9,000 deaths. Italy, 2016, deaths in a developed country. The global average is 20,000 deaths per year in earthquakes. Per year. Since you started watching this video, statistically 3 people have died in some earthquake in the world. While you were comfortable on the couch, someone was crushed by concrete. And while 3 people were crushed by concrete, while you were processing these numbers, I need to reveal something that will make your blood run cold. Lisbon knew. The Portuguese government knew the earthquake was coming and chose not to warn anyone. In 2015, the secret archives of the Marquis of Pombal were finally opened to the public. 260 years of secrets. What did they find? Letters. Dozens of letters dated 1754, a year earlier. Jesuit scientists writing about unusual tremors, wells drying up without explanation, animals fleeing the city en masse. A letter from August 1755, 3 months earlier. Father Antonio Sanchez, royal. Mathematician writes to the king, "The tremors are increasing in frequency. The buildings are showing cracks. I recommend evacuation of the court." The king's response, "Do not cause unnecessary panic." October 1755, 2 weeks before, fishermen report bizarre sea behavior, unexplained receding tides, dead fish floating by the thousands. Well, water tastes of sulfur. The government has the fishermen arrested for spreading superstition. October 31st, the eve of the earthquake. All the dogs in Lisbon barked all night. Horses refused to enter the city. Cats disappeared. Birds flew inland. The nobles who owned estates in the countryside coincidentally traveled that week. Coincidence? The archives show travel orders dated October 29th. They knew, not with modern scientific certainty, but they knew that something catastrophic was coming. And they chose to sacrifice 250,000 people, so as not to cause panic, so as not to appear superstitious, so as not to lose control. Now, 2025, the same signs are appearing. Turkey, weeks before the 2023 earthquake. Hundreds of videos of panicked animals ignored. Groundwater changing temperature. Irrelevant, they said. Micro-tremors increasing, normal, they assured, California. Now sea lions abandoning beaches en masse, whales stranding for no reason. San Andreas fault with tripled seismic activity. The government says, there is no reason to worry. Exactly the same words as Lisbon. Japan detected magnetic anomalies 3 days before the 2011 tsunami. They didn't warn to avoid causing economic panic. 20,000 dead. China detected mass evacuation of snakes before dismissing it as a coincidence. 87,000 dead. Your government is doing the same now. Seismic data classified, reports downplayed. The truth is they'd rather you die ignorant than live in panic, because panic harms the economy. Dead people don't complain. Dead people don't complain. And while you watch these, 15 minutes, meaning I would die in Lisbon, I need to make one thing clear. This isn't psychological terror, it's simple math. 15 minutes have passed. In that time, 43 tremors have occurred globally. 3 people have died in natural disasters. This is data from the USGS, the United States Geological Survey. Verifiable, real. Lisbon today has 540,000 inhabitants. The geological fault that caused the 1755 earthquake still exists. The estimated time between major events is 200 to 300 years. 270 have already passed. This isn't speculation, it's basic geology. What you do with this information is your choice. If you live in a seismic zone, having an emergency kit is an official recommendation from any civil protection agency. Water, non-perishable food, a flashlight, a basic medical kit. It's not paranoia. It's basic preparedness that governments around the world recommend. Share if you found the historical content relevant. The Lisbon earthquake changed European philosophy, architecture, and science. Understanding how civilizations respond to disasters helps us be better prepared. Comment on your city if you want to learn more about real seismic risks, not to create panic, but to understand the local geology. Knowledge saves lives. In the next video, how did the reconstruction of Lisbon create the world's first earthquake-resistant architecture? And what can we learn from it today? Lisbon 175 was a tragedy that killed 100,000 people, but it was also the birth of modern seismology, earthquake-resistant architecture, and urban disaster planning. They didn't have scientific knowledge. We do. They couldn't predict it. We can prepare. The difference between tragedy and survival is often simply applied information. The Lisbon earthquake taught us that nature doesn't negotiate, but it also taught us that humans can learn, adapt, and rebuild better. Use this knowledge as you will, but now you know what they didn't.